Our presenter today is Dale Isaacs, president of Brentwood Consulting Group. Dale Isaacs has over 40 years experience in management systems and strategic project management. Dale has operated a management services, systems, and engineering and consulting company for over 25 years and is also the past owner and CEO of a multi-million-dollar corporation specializing in the design and production of precision components and special machines, which he sold in 2010. Dale's expertise includes the development, implementation, and hands-on application of management systems. He was responsible for several of the first operations in the United States to become ISO 9001 certified in the late 1980s. Dale is also a certified lead auditor conducting ISO 9001 management system certification body audits across the United States. Dale is the senior instructor for the leading international provider of management systems training and consulting, as well as for the American Society of Quality, where Dale is an ASQ validated instructor and has instructed hundreds of exemplar global certified lead auditor courses. In addition to his practical expertise and experience, Dale currently holds the position of Secretary of the United States Technical Advisory Group to TC 176 of the International Organization of Standards, responsible for the developing the ISO 9001 and ISO 10000 family of management system standards. As an active and leading member of the industry, Dale is also the Secretary for the U.S. Strategic Planning Council for ISO 9001, the United States Chair of the Standards Interpretation and Application Subcommittee for TC 176, responsible for facilitating the official interpretation position for ISO 9001 requirements in the United States. A member of the Subcommittee 3, responsible for supporting technology standards to TC 176, and a representative for the United States globally for ISO 9001 interpretations to TC 176. And with that, Dale, I hand it over to you.
Well, thank you, Scott. I'm happy to be with everybody today virtually. Wish it could be in person, but there's always next year. After any business interruption, especially post-pandemic, it's highly likely that your management system needs to be restarted, or at the very least, needs some adjustment or a tune-up. What should you consider to ensure that your system makes a full recovery from the events of the last year and a half? Well, let's consider 4 steps that are critical to restarting a management system. What we'll talk about today, the agenda for our meeting today, is first, we'll take a look at the current situation and how do you restart your management system after an interruption. We'll look at reassessing the context of your organization, which has most likely changed. We'll look at redefining interested parties, reevaluating the scope of your management system, and then we'll wrap up by adjusting the management system and its processes, and then ultimately applying risk-based thinking to all of that. And on the screen, of course, you can see the references for the ISO 9001 clauses. Now, throughout the presentation today, we'll use references from ISO 9000, the dictionary, as well as ISO 9001, the standard. And I will paraphrase some of those references to help in our understanding. Well, one of the first things that we need to do is we need to take a look at terms and definitions from ISO 9000. The terms and definitions from ISO 9000 are critical for a restart. Top management. One of the terms, top management, is the person or the group of people that directs and controls an organization at the highest level. Context of the organization. That's going to be the combination of internal and external issues that have an effect on the organization's approach to developing and achieving its objectives. Interested parties. Those are the stakeholders, the people, the organization that can be affected by, or even perceive themselves to be affected by something that we do. And then, of course, processes, systems, and management systems. A process, of course, that's a set of interrelated interacting activities that transform inputs into outputs. I'm paraphrasing again. A system is a collection of processes. And so a management system, it's all this set of interrelated or interacting processes that an organization has to help it to run. Well, first, let's make some assumptions for today's presentation. The first assumption that we need to make is that you had a completely functional, 100% compliant management system in place before the business disruption. If not, you need to add to the recommendations that we're going to present here today. How your organization is structured is also likely going to be different after the interruption than it was before the interruption. Finally, the post-pandemic business environment. It has forced all of us to change. It's forced a change, most likely in the internal and external issues that affect your business. They're likely different. That's the context. Interested parties, possibly different after the interruption. Scope may be different. The business processes probably, almost surely are different. And then risks, definitely going to be different after the interruption than before it. So first, a word of caution for all of us. In the past, organizations have tended to do what others have done when they're restructuring their management system. We tend to do what the company next door or the sister business unit or the other division of our company has done. And we copy it and put it in place. Well, ISO intends organizations to structure their management system in a way that is unique to their particular organization. Keep in mind, there's many ways to meet the ISO 9001 requirements. We're only going to present some possible ideas right here. At the end of the time, we have to realize that organizations need to have a management system that meets their unique business needs. Well, in the interest of precise communication today, we will be focusing on big Q thinking. Big Q concepts or quality. Big Q concepts were identified many, many years ago by Dr. Joseph Juran. The big Q, it focuses more on the strategic management of quality in all of the business processes, in all of the products or all of the services that you produce or that you provide. That's big Q thinking. Little Q thinking, however, it's more of a tactical attention, often limited to product quality. It's a much narrower scope. It's usually focused on, well, primarily on external customers. Well, part of the confusion that people have is trying to apply 9001 while they are thinking little q. The big Q includes the little q, but it also includes organizational matters and supporting administrative processes that are not included in the little q. While big Q ideas have been around for a long, long time, many organizations miss the benefits that can be achieved through addressing big Q processes. From a management standpoint, focus on the little q is counterproductive. If the organization desires to be prosperous for more than just a few years, a more strategic approach, big Q thinking, is needed. The intent of 9001 is to direct our focus on the big Q. Several clauses in the standard address that. Clause 4.4.1, in the front end of the 9001 standard requires the organization to determine the processes needed for the quality management system and their application, there it is, throughout the organization. That is most certainly big Q thinking. A little bit later in the standard, when it's talking about top management and leadership responsibility, in clause 5.1.1, it requires top management to demonstrate their leadership by ensuring the integration of the quality management system requirements into the organization's business processes. Most certainly, that is big Q thinking. Top management is required to promote the use of the process approach and risk-based thinking throughout their organization. Well, an easy way to transition to big Q thinking, just substitute the word business in place of the word quality in 9001, and that standard gets to be really easy, really quickly. Now, that word business, I chose that. That's applicable mainly to U.S. English. It may be different in other sectors or in other countries, other languages. So restarting a management system. There are 4 steps to restarting a management system. Step number 1, we're going to perform a new context analysis. Well, that's listed in clause 4.1, performing the context analysis. Step 2, we're going to reassess interested parties and see how that affects the business. Step 3, you may need to adjust your scope, the scope of the management system, and we'll talk about that and what that means. And then step 4, we will reanalyze and update the business management system and its processes. So let's see what that looks like. Step 1, the context of the business management system. You'll see in clause 4.1 of ISO 9001 that it talks about understanding the organization and its context. In clause 4.1, it tells us that the organization shall determine the internal and external issues that are relevant to its purpose and its strategic direction that affect its ability to be successful. And even before a disruption or an interruption, the organization is required to monitor and review information about those internal and external issues because they change. So, to reassess context, what if we thought about clause 4.1 like this? What if we did a little wordsmithing on the standard and we kind of paraphrased things a little bit, and maybe we rewrote the title of clause 4.1 so that the title became something like understanding and performing a strategic analysis on the business? Well, if we did that, then we could rewrite clause 4.1, and it might be worded something like this: the organization shall perform a strategic analysis on the organization in order to determine the factors that affect its ability to be successful. The organization will determine the external opportunities and threats and the internal strengths and weaknesses that are relevant to its purpose and its strategic direction. Well, a strategic analysis, it really forms the database of the organization's strategic plan. It's an in-depth examination of the internal and the external factors that surround the organization that are likely to have the greatest impact on the future of the organization. External factors, well, that can include things like the market segment that you participate in, technology, competition, what your industry structure is, perhaps the economic environments, and the strategic opportunities and the threats that face the business. Internal factors, that includes things like financial resources, products or services. Internal capabilities, like your capabilities for production, engineering, maybe research and development. The culture, the knowledge, the strategic strengths and limitations on the organization. So to assist us in reanalyzing the context, I'll give you an organizational context matrix. An organizational context matrix, it's a structured planning method used to evaluate the strengths and the weaknesses, the opportunities and threats involved in a project or in a business venture. The context matrix, it's best completed by members of top management in a brainstorming session or by individual middle managers for a given process that they own or that they're responsible for. The analysis can be carried out for a business. It could be carried out for a product, a place, an industry, or even a person. So looking at the context matrix, I revised this for some of the things that have happened in the last year and a half. I've talked to a lot of friends. We kind of brainstormed these things. These are some things that I've seen in actual companies. So looking at the upper left-hand part of the matrix, those are some strengths, some things that we do well, some internal things that could help us to achieve our objectives. Maybe our production flexibility or our product mix could be a strength of ours. Maybe infrastructure, especially today, IT infrastructure. Perhaps one of the things that could help us is that we have made the transition to big Q thinking. We're thinking business-wide, not just the little Q. Maybe some things that could help us. We have an experienced staff, but then we've lost some due to COVID. Those are just some brainstorming ideas. The ones for your company are most definitely going to be different. In the upper right-hand corner, some things that we don't do so well. Maybe as a result of the disruption, the interruption, perhaps we have an unstable management system. Maybe some processes have slipped. Maybe we've actually stopped some processes. We've lost human interaction. People are doing remote work now. They don't come into the office. And so therefore, we've lost the company synergy, the thing that makes us unique because we're no longer working together. We have labor shortages, inexperienced workforces. Maybe workers have been displaced. Maybe there's turnover. Maybe there's a problem with IT support. And it's on the news every day, different security threats that could hinder us from achieving our objectives. Those are things that could be harmful. On the lower left-hand side, opportunities, things we could do better. Maybe we could provide new products or new markets. Maybe we even have access to some new customers, some things that we have not done before. Economical funding. Money is relatively inexpensive right now. And so maybe that might give us an opportunity to expand into some other areas or expand some of our infrastructure. Maybe we have an opportunity to expand management processes, management review and internal audit. Maybe instead of doing that one time a year, maybe we expand those processes where we're actually doing management review and internal audit once a month or more frequently before our external competitors do it to us. A threat, maybe some threats, some things that could harm us. Supply chain disruptions, we've all experienced that. The remote work is affecting the company culture. Processes that were designed to work with people on site can't work anymore. We've lost a lot of organizational knowledge that we used to have, that we developed when we were together. Well, strengths, again, everybody, those are those things that give us an advantage over others. Weaknesses, those are things that could be a disadvantage to us. Opportunities, well, those are things that we could exploit to our advantage. And threats, of course, are things that could cause trouble for us. So I highlighted a few of those things. Okay, and we will carry this theme throughout the rest of the presentation. We'll look at unstable management systems, some processes that have slipped or stopped altogether, labor shortages, worker displacement, supply chain disruptions, or maybe the opportunity to expand our management system. So those things will influence interested parties as well. Changes in the context. A change in the internal or external context can impact interested parties. Well, an interested party is defined in ISO 9000, the dictionary, as a stakeholder, person, organization that can affect, be affected by, or even perceive itself to be affected by a decision or an activity. And the list of relevant interested parties can be, and often is, unique to every organization. Well, post-pandemic, in the post-pandemic business environment, it has forced a change in what interested parties need. Clause 4.2 in 9001 says that due to their effect or potential effect on the organization's ability to consistently provide products and services that meet customer, statutory, and regulatory requirements, the organization shall determine A, who the interested parties are, and B, what they need. Well, by definition, interested parties can have an impact on our ability to provide products or services that meet requirements. So interested parties, they're more than just your direct customers. Interested parties, they can influence or impact the organization's performance or decisions that the organization makes. Interested parties could create new risks, as well as creating new opportunities for the business. Interested parties could have influence or impact on a market. They could affect the organization through their decisions or activities that they perform. Some common interested parties could include things like customers, shareholders, owners, end users, parent companies, unions, bankers, suppliers, local community groups or local businesses. And don't forget, competitors are an interested party for our business. Well, I highlighted a few. Customers, end users, suppliers, and competitors, and we'll take this thread throughout the rest of the presentation. Let's see how interested parties can impact the business. Well, different customers could have different requirements. And clause 8.2 talks about understanding the customer's requirements. Well, new customers could have new requirements, as well as new end users. New customers could force us to develop new products, things that we've never done before. So now we have to develop a new product. Well, that's clause 8.3, design. Management, you've got old internal processes that were designed when people were together, and now that we're apart and hopefully coming back together, that will affect management. It could affect employees, even employees' families could be affected by that. And then, of course, suppliers. We're using that make versus buy decision. We used to make it in-house, but we're going to stop making it in-house because we lost our expertise. So we need to outsource it. Well, who are we going to outsource it to? Are there some new suppliers that we need to qualify and bring on? And then competitors. What if our competitor, I want you to think about it. What if our competitor did the big Q and we don't? Well, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And some of us have been punched in the mouth. So all of those things could force a change in scope of the business. Well, the scope of the management system, it's not defined in ISO 9000. It is described in 9001, clause 4.3. So in Dale's dictionary, the scope, that's the boundaries, the applicability of the business management system. Post-pandemic business environment, it's most likely forced a change in the scope of our management system. So we need to relook at the things that are applicable to us and the things that are not. Clause 4.3 says the organization will determine the boundaries and applicability of the management system in order to determine the scope. And when you're determining the scope, you'll consider A, the context. Well, we talked about that. You'll also consider B, the requirements of interested parties. Keep in mind that could have changed as a result of the interruption or the disruption. Maybe we have new products, new services that we're now providing. The scope will state the type of product or services covered, and it will provide justification for any requirement that the organization determines is not applicable to our scope. There were some things that we used to do. We lost the expertise. We outsource it now. So we no longer do that here. Well, with a change of context, a change of interested parties, perhaps a change of scope, now you may outsource a process that you previously did in-house. Or maybe you might just discontinue it altogether. You might have lost that expertise, the organizational knowledge that used to perform that process, and it no longer exists. Maybe you've lost a supplier. Maybe the market has changed, or your customers no longer exist. There's the opportunity to perform service or produce something in-house that you previously outsourced or didn't do. Maybe you have new customers or a new market that opened up. Previously, you outsourced it, maybe to a subcontractor. Maybe the subcontractor's gone. Maybe it's now too expensive. And so what you used to manage through clause 8.4 procurement, now you're going to have to manage through clause 8.5 production and service provision. The management system and its processes. There's 9 steps that we're going to go through right here as we bring all of this into focus. The management system. 4.4.1 says that the organization will establish, implement, maintain, continually improve a business management system, including the processes needed and their interactions in accordance with the requirements of the standard. So what if we did a little wordsmithing in the standard? What if we changed a couple of words here and there to kind of make this make more sense? Paragraph 2 in clause 4.4.1, we might make a change to that so that it reads, the organization shall determine the processes needed to run the business. Now that's easier to understand, as well as their application throughout the business. Again, everybody, big Q thinking. And then it lists a bunch of things that the organization shall do right down the page, A, B, C, D, right down the page right there. What we're going to do, I'm going to take these things, I'm going to shuffle the order in light of the business disruption, the business interruption. We'll shuffle the order and make these things easy for us to revisit. The first thing that we want to do, well, there it is. It's in clause 4.4.1, paragraph number 2. The organization shall determine the processes needed to run the business. There may be some new processes after the disruption that did not exist before the interruption. So we need to include those with the other processes that we are continuing in our business. And we need to apply that throughout the organization. Dr. Deming had a great quote that said, if you can't describe what you're doing as a process, you don't know what you're doing. Remember, you might have some new processes, or you may no longer perform others that you were performing before the interruption. All of those are highly dependent on context and interested parties. So there's at least two ways to think about the processes required to run the business. One way involves little Q thinking along the top of the slide, where only the production processes are involved. The other way is big Q thinking, where all of the processes required to run the business throughout the business are considered. Well, remember, some of the processes may have changed due to changes in context, changes in interested parties, or even a change in scope. You're bringing a new product on. You never did design before, and now you have to do design to design that new product. Maybe procurement, the purchasing processes, maybe they're changed. We've brought new suppliers on board, and now we need to do supplier certification, vendor qualification. The production processes may have changed. You used to outsource it. Now, after the disruption, you've decided to produce in-house. And so you have new production processes. We've talked about context. We've talked about interested parties. Both of those have likely changed. The internal audit process that feeds back to you how the business is running, most definitely it'll change. Infrastructure and environment to operate the processes, that might change. The measurement systems, you used to not need them. Now you do because you've brought a new process in place. And organizational knowledge that we've lost over the last year and a half, or competence that we have to build back. Well, that's the first step, to look at the processes required to run the business. The second step, top management assigns responsibilities and authorities for the processes. If you haven't done it already, do it with your old processes. If you have some new processes, do it for the new processes. That's called process owners. So the second step is 441E, assigning responsibilities, process owners. The third step, the top management, along with process owners, determine the sequence and the interaction of those processes. Remember, it's highly dependent on context and interested parties, both of which may have changed. Well, many organizations manage by function or manage by department. When you manage by function, only those parts of the process that occur in that function get managed, and processes get sub-optimized. The problem with that is business is not run by function. It is not run by departments. Business is run by processes. So the fourth thing that we need to do, clause 441A, we need to get the process owners to figure out the inputs required and the outputs expected from their process. Who better to do that than the person that's operating the process every day? They know what the inputs are. They know what the outputs are. Remember, they may have changed after the interruption. The fifth step is to get the process owners to address risks and opportunities as determined in accordance with the requirements of the standard. We'll look at how to do that here in a second. The implication for us is given in Annex A.4 of ISO 9001. It's all the way in the back of the standard. Nobody ever reads the annexes. This one's pretty helpful. Annex A.4 says, this international standard specifies requirements for an organization to understand its context, 4.1, and determine risks as a basis for planning. This represents the application of risk-based thinking to planning and implementing a management system. And it'll also assist in determining the extent of the documented information that you need. Well, Clause 6.1, prominently mentioned in Annex A.4, as well as in 4.4.1F, let's take a look at what that means as based on actions to address risks and opportunities. Remember, step 5, we're going to have the process owners do this. When you're planning out the management system, clause 6.1.1 says, when you're planning out how you want the management system to look, the organization will consider the issues referred to in 4.1, that's context, and you'll also look at the requirements of interested parties from 4.2. You'll determine the risks and the opportunities that need to be addressed. And then it helps in 6.1.2 if you'll just circle a couple of key words right here and kind of connect the dots. If you do that, 6.1.2 gets really easy. 6.1.2 then reads, the organization shall plan how to integrate risk-based actions into the processes. Which processes? Well, it's the ones required to run the business. Remember, step number 1. So if you look at clause 6.1 like this, it becomes pretty easy. The organization shall plan how to integrate risk-based actions into the processes that are required to run the business. So who does it? Well, it's the process owners. How do you do it? Well, let's take a look at one of the processes and apply risk-based thinking. Well, we've got a new design process, perhaps, because we've got those new products, those new customers. Purchasing has been revised, quite probably. And then production processes, let's look at that one. We might have a new production process, something that you might have previously outsourced. So for each process in the business, we're going to apply risk-based thinking and look at the inputs and the outputs. Who does it? Well, in our example right here, the new production process owner could do it. This is called a turtle diagram. Those of you that are not familiar with it, it's a brainstorming tool. Have the process owners look at their processes and identify risks for each of the inputs and the outputs. Well, you might say that new production process on the lower left-hand corner of the turtle diagram. The new production process, does it require new procedures, new work instructions, new methods, new procedures, new work instructions? On the upper left-hand side, maybe it's going to require some new test equipment, some new machines, maybe some new environmental conditions that new process has to run in. New competencies required, perhaps, and then measurements and metrics for that new process. What are the process objectives? What are the targets? What are the goals? So have the process owners take those risks and plug them into a risk impact analysis matrix. This represents the application of risk-based thinking. Now, although 6.1 of 9001 specifies the organization to plan actions to address risk, there is no requirement for formal methods for risk management or a documented risk management process, only that we plan our risks. There's no need for a risk database, a risk list, a risk register. There is no requirement for that in 9001, only that we implement risk-based thinking. So here's one way to do it. Use a risk impact analysis matrix. In this one, I took some of the things we've been talking about, the revised purchasing process or the new production process. And you get your process owners to look at their processes, include all the sub-processes in this matrix. Second column, identify the things that could go wrong, the risks for the process. The risks are described in the third column, and then you just fill out the rest of the form. You look at likelihood. How likely is that risk to happen? If it's not very likely, you assign it a 1. If it's very likely, that might be a 10. The risk impact analysis matrix, it's most effective when it's completed in a brainstorming session by several cross-functional people in the organization, including internal customers and internal suppliers. So we've assigned likelihood, consequence of the risk. We can sort it by several different criteria. Consequence to operation, property, people, customers, or the environment. Again, a 1 to 10 scale, brainstorming where they might, in our best opinion, where they might lie, assign that 1 to 10 value, add them up, it gives you a sum in the green column. Multiply likelihood times consequence. In the green column, that'll give you risk magnitude in the third column from the right, column C, the risk magnitude. Now, some of those things you could just write a memo and they're handled. Well, that would have a low residual resistance to treatment. That's the second column from the right, column D. So you might assign a 1 for that. On the other hand, there are those processes where you write procedures, you write work instructions, you develop all kinds of different things, and there's no way that you can control them. That would be a high residual resistance to treatment. Multiply column C times column D. It gives you a final impact analysis ranking. Sort them highest to lowest. It'll give you the priority for what to work on first and what to work on next. Remember, a calculated risk is better than an improvised reaction. Sixth, we're going to get top management to get the process owners to figure out, to determine and apply the criteria and methods needed to ensure effective operation and control of the processes. Seventh, we're going to get the process owners to determine the resources needed for the processes and ensure that the resources are available. Well, does that mean I've got to write procedures for these new processes? And how do I affect performance? Well, there's at least 5 ways to affect performance. Here they are right here. You could write a procedure. That's choice number 1. You could forget writing a procedure, just get competent people. Well, sometimes it's enough just to tell somebody what to do and let them do it. Back off and let them do it. Sometimes competence is achieved through years of practice and experience, that organizational knowledge, which we might have lost during the interruption. If you don't want to do those two, how about providing training or putting process controls in place, hard controls or soft controls, hard controls that you can't easily defeat. Those are templates, fixtures, hard stops, soft controls. Warning lights, buzzers, boundary lines, patterns. Or ultimately, you could just provide verification and oversight. Somebody watches somebody do the new process and corrects them when they go wrong. Usually what people do is a combination of all of those things right there. 8th, get top management to evaluate the processes. The best way to evaluate a process is by auditing that process. If you only do audits 1 time a year, you are really missing out on one of the sharpest tools in management's toolbox. Management evaluates the processes, and the process owners implement changes that are needed to ensure that the processes are achieving their intended results. Ninth, get the process owners to continually improve their processes. Now, a key part to every management system, and we've got to look at this to make sure that this did not get disrupted or stopped during the interruption. 3 key processes: management review, internal audit, and corrective action. It's possible that during the interruption, during the disruption, we've put off our management reviews and we haven't conducted them for some time. Maybe we've lost our internal auditors and we have to train some new internal auditors. Top management's job is to define the system, put it in place, and run it. Auditors find the good stuff and the bad stuff. The bad stuff, we put it into our corrective action process, fix the problem, management puts a new process in place and runs it, and you get your auditors to audit that new system. That's the self-healing mechanism that's contained in all management systems. If one of those things is not exactly working correctly, then you've lost that self-healing part of the business. So to summarize, in order to restart the business, what we're going to do is we're going to follow the steps given in ISO 9001, clause number 4. The disruption occurs. First thing that we do is we revisit our context, which has most likely changed from before the interruption. We perform that new context analysis and have those new internal or external factors that could affect the business and see how those have changed. Next, step 2, take another look and reassess who the interested parties are. They may not be the same as the interested parties prior to the disruption. Third, adjust the scope of the management system if required. There may be some things that you weren't doing, but you are doing now, or vice versa. And then fourth, taking those new or those updated processes, reanalyzing and re-updating them. Remember, step 4 has 9 different parts. Here they are. The first part, determine the processes needed to run the business and how they apply throughout the organization. I'm giving the references on the far right-hand side of each one of these, the clause references. Second, assign responsibilities and authorities for those processes. That's process owners. Third, get top management along with the process owners to figure out the sequence and the interaction of the processes. Fourth, get the process owners to determine the inputs required and the outputs that are expected from those processes. Fifth, have the process owners address risk as well as opportunities for each of the inputs and the outputs for their process. Sixth, determine and apply the criteria and methods, the measures needed to ensure that the processes are working. And that includes any documents or records that you might want to use. Seventh, determine and provide the resources needed for the processes. Eighth, audit those processes. If you have a new process, you better be auditing it very frequently to make sure that it's set up correctly and it's delivering the results that you need. Ninth, continually improve the processes that are now required to run your new business, and you will have successfully restarted your business management system. Thank you guys for joining me today. I hope that that this will be of help to you, and I hope to see all of you in person next year.